Winging It, how Matt Armstrong built a $1 million brand from a £600 wreck. 9 lessons in resilience, authenticity, and building something real from the wreckage. Introduction. Just a regular guy. The secret of getting ahead is getting started. Mark Twain. There is a moment in almost every Matt Armstrong video, usually around the 20-minute mark, when he is elbow deep in an engine bay or crouched beneath a chassis that has been declared beyond saving by someone with far more credentials than him, where something goes wrong that wasn't supposed to go wrong. It might be a bolt that shears off flush with the casing. It might be a part that arrives from the supplier and turns out to be for a completely different model. It may be a sound, a knock, a rattle, a silence that should be filled with something, that appears without explanation in a system he has just spent 2 days rebuilding. Whatever the specific form, the shape of the moment is always the same. A problem has arrived that was not in the plan, and the plan, such as it was, no longer applies. In these moments, Matt does something that most content creators would edit out. He stops what he is doing. He steps back. He looks directly into the camera with an expression that is somewhere between rueful and amused, and he says some version of the same sentence he has been saying in one form or another since the very first video he ever posted about a car. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing, but we're going to figure it out. And then, and this is the part that has made him one of the most watched automotive creators in the world, the part that 6 million subscribers have tuned in to see, the part that Richard Hammond endorsed and that sponsors have paid handsomely to be adjacent to. He figures it out. That sentence is, in miniature, the entire arc of Matt Armstrong's career. It is also, this book will argue, one of the most useful frameworks any of us can apply to our own work, our own creative ambitions, and our own attempts to build something meaningful from whatever materials life happens to leave us with. The honest admission of uncertainty paired with the stubborn commitment to keep going anyway, that combination, more than any particular mechanical skill, any content strategy, or any fortunate coincidence of timing, is what has built the channel, the business, and the extraordinary trust that underpins it all. But let us begin at the beginning. Who is Matt Armstrong? Matt Armstrong was born in Leicester, England in June 1993. He grew up in a household shaped primarily by 2 things: his father Tony's deep, practical knowledge of engines and mechanics, and his own restless physical energy, and energy that found its first serious outlet not in cars, but on a BMX bike. By his mid-teens, Matt was competing in freestyle BMX events with genuine ability. By his late teens, he had sponsorships, including from Mad Gear Pro, which covered travel expenses to competitions across Europe and into the Middle East. He was flying to France, Germany, Dubai, competing against other riders at the international level, and building the kind of focused identity that competitive sport gives to those who commit to it fully. He also, crucially, was filming. Recording his rides to send to sponsors and post online was simply what riders did. It was part of the ecosystem of the sport. Matt developed basic skills in editing and production, without particularly noticing, because they were in service of something else. Then his shoulder dislocated during a qualifying run at the BMX World Championships in Germany. He completed the run. He even qualified 16th place. But the shoulder that had gone wrong during a 720 tail whip did not come fully right again. It developed a habit of dislocating without warning, reaching for something, turning in his sleep, in situations that had nothing to do with sport. The ongoing instability made full-time competitive riding impossible. The career that had structured his late adolescence was, in the bluntest possible way, no longer available. He was around 20 years old. What followed? The return to garage work, the various part-time jobs, the slow accumulation of mechanical knowledge alongside his father, the cheap camera pointed at a crashed Audi TT, the years of patient posting before the channel found its footing, the lockdown that accelerated everything, is the story this book tells. But it is also more than a single person's story, because Matt Armstrong's journey, examined carefully and honestly, turns out to contain a set of lessons that have nothing specifically to do with BMX or cars or YouTube algorithms, and everything to do with the universal challenge of building something meaningful from the materials life leaves you with after the plan has changed. What this book is, and what it is not. This book is not a biography. It does not attempt to be a comprehensive account of every car Matt has rebuilt, every sponsorship he has signed, every milestone his channel has reached, or every decision he has made along the way. Matt Armstrong tells his own story better than any third party could, and the best version of it is available in extraordinary detail on his YouTube channel. What this book is, instead, is a lens. Each of the 9 chapters takes a moment or a theme from Matt's journey and asks, what does this teach us? What is the principle buried inside this specific experience, this particular decision, this seemingly incidental detail? And how might we apply that principle in our own work, our own creative lives, our own attempts to start something from nothing and keep going long enough for it to become something real? The 9 lessons this book draws from Matt's stories are not new ideas. They are not discoveries. People have been arriving at versions of them independently throughout human history, in every field from philosophy to sport to business to art. What Matt's story offers is not novelty, but vividness, a concrete, specific, richly documented example of what these principles look like when they are lived rather than merely stated. And that vividness matters, because it is one thing to agree in the abstract that authenticity is important, or that starting before you're ready is usually better than waiting, or that people who knew you before your success are among your most valuable relations. It is quite another to see exactly what those things look like in practice, in the life of a person who embodied them without necessarily planning to. That is the advantage of drawing lessons from a real person's real journey, rather than constructing a set of abstract principles and illustrating them with hypotheticals. When the example is concrete and documented and public, the argument carries a weight that no amount of theoretical elaboration can quite replicate. The 9 lessons, briefly stated. Each chapter of this book takes one of the following lessons as its organizing theme. They are introduced here briefly and developed at length in the chapters that follow. The first lesson is that setbacks are not interruptions to your path. They very often are the path. Matt's BMX injury did not divert him from his destiny. In the most literal sense, it created it. The career he was forced out of pointed him at the work that would define his life. The second is that starting scrappy beats waiting for perfect conditions almost every time. The £600 Audi TT was not a calculated bet on a content strategy. It was the cheapest possible version of a very simple idea, executed with whatever was to hand. The constraints were not obstacles to the real thing. The third is that done and honest and imperfect is almost always better than polished and withheld. The GoPro footage that defined Matt's early channel was rough, because he had no alternative. But its roughness was not incidental to its success, it was central to it. The imperfection was the proof that it was genuine. The fourth is that periods of forced stillness, properly used, can produce the most important work of your life. The COVID lockdown did not create Matt Armstrong's success. It removed the obstacles that had been slowing it down. The fifth is that the people who knew you before your success are load-bearing in ways that successful people often fail to acknowledge. Tony Armstrong is not a character in his son's story. He is, in the most practical sense, one of the reasons the story exists. The sixth is that credibility cannot be manufactured or purchased, only earned through accumulated honesty, and it compounds in exactly the way financial interest does. The Richard Hammond moment did not create Matt's audience. It found one that was already worth finding. The seventh is that when institutions try to shut you out, transparency is your most powerful response. The Bugatti situation is a masterclass in what happens when genuine work, honestly documented, meets corporate resistance. The eighth is that depth of audience is more commercially valuable, more creatively sustaining, and more humanly satisfying than breadth. The 50-minute video is not a failure to be concise. It is a commitment to be thorough, and the audience that watches it is worth more in almost every meaningful sense than the audience that scrolled past a 30-second clip. The ninth, and in many ways the most important, is that admitting you don't know everything is not a weakness. It is, in an era saturated with performed expertise and manufactured authority, one of the rarest and most valuable signals a person can send. It is the foundation of genuine trust, and genuine trust accumulated over time is the most durable asset any creator or entrepreneur can possess. Why Matt Armstrong, and why now? A reasonable question to ask before committing to 9 chapters organized around a single person's career is, why this person? There are many creators who have built significant audiences. There are many entrepreneurs who have grown businesses from nothing to something substantial. There are many people who have navigated setbacks and found better paths on the other side. What is specifically instructive about Matt Armstrong as opposed to the many others whose stories could fill similar chapters? There are several answers, and they compound each other. The first is documentation. Matt Armstrong's entire journey, from the earliest GoPro footage to the most recent Bugatti episode, is recorded, public, and extensively watched. The record is not a memoir written with the benefit of hindsight, with the rough parts smoothed and the narrative tidied into something more coherent than events as they were actually lived. It is a real-time document made as things were happening, with all the uncertainty and false starts and genuine confusions that real-time documentation captures. This makes it unusually reliable as a source of lessons, because the record cannot be retrospectively revised to make the path look straighter than it was. The second is accessibility. Matt Armstrong is not a billionaire, not a prodigy, not someone who came from a background of unusual privilege, or who had access to resources that are not available to most people. He grew up in Leicester, worked ordinary jobs, learned mechanics from his father, and built his channel with a GoPro and a £600 car. The starting conditions are not so different from those many people find themselves in that the story becomes useless as a model. The distance between where he started and where you are is manageable in a way that the distance between Elon Musk started and where you are is not. The third is recency. Matt's story is not historical. It is happening now, in the current media environment, on the current platforms, under the current conditions. The lessons it offers are not translated from a different era. They are native to the world that most people who read this book are actually operating in. And the fourth is the specific quality that the whole book is, in the end, about. Matt Armstrong built something remarkable, not by being exceptional in the ways we usually celebrate, not by being a genius, not by having a revolutionary idea, not by being in the right place at exactly the right time in a way that no one else could have managed. He built it by being honest, consistent, and stubbornly committed to doing real work in public for a long time. Those are qualities that anyone can develop. That is the point. How to use this book. Each chapter follows a similar structure. It opens with a scene from Matt's story, a specific moment, described as vividly as the public record allows. It then broadens out to examine the principle that moment illustrates, drawing on research, on examples from other fields and other lives, and on the specific qualities of Matt's approach that made his version of the lesson work. Each chapter closes with a highlighted lesson statement and a set of reflection questions. The reflection questions are not decorative. They are arguably the most valuable part of each chapter. Reading about someone else's lessons is interesting and occasionally inspiring. Sitting with questions that apply those lessons to your own specific situation is where the reading becomes useful. I would strongly encourage engaging with them, even briefly, even imperfectly, before moving to the next chapter. One final note before we begin. This book was written by an independent admirer of Matt Armstrong's work, not by Matt Armstrong himself. All interpretations are the author's own. Where the book describes Matt's experiences, motivations, or internal reasoning, it draws on his public videos, interviews, and documented history, not on private access. The conclusions drawn are attempts to understand a public story, honestly and carefully, rather than to present a private person's self-understanding. With that said, the garage is open. Let's get to work. Reflection questions. Take a moment before moving to the next chapter to sit with these questions. You don't need to answer them in writing, though that often helps, but they deserve more than a quick skim. Question 1. Is there something you have been putting off starting because the conditions are not yet right? What is the actual minimum version of that thing? The smallest possible version that still contains the essential idea. Question 2. Think of the most significant setback you have experienced in the past 5 years. What did it close? What, if anything, did it open? Have you fully explored what it opened? Question 3. Who in your life would you describe as the person most likely to tell you the truth when everyone else is being supportive? How recently did you actively seek their opinion on something important? And question 4. When you imagine the work you most want to be doing, what is the version of that work you could start today? Not in perfect conditions, but in the conditions you actually have.